One does not simply walk into Mordor.
The land of shadow.
Hey, welcome everybody. In today's Shadowcast, I'm going to be offering up my review of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. As promised, I will not be holding back on my opinions of the show or the fandom. And as always, here in Mordor, you're going to get the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we bow to no one. So fasten your seatbelts because it's going to be a bumpy ride. One of the things I plan to do over what will probably be the course of 3 videos for this overall review of season 1 is to offer up a series of star ratings. One that will be a rating of fan reaction and its reception across the world at large. The second for how it stacks up to other fantasy, TV and movie franchises. And thirdly, a measure, and this is really important to me, a measure of its adherence to the Tolkien canon. And finally, the show's overall quality of writing, acting, and visual presentation. Finally, it's with great sorrow that I want to mark the passing of my oldest brother, CB. He set sail for the Grey Havens on January 8th, and last weekend we threw a party in his honor to celebrate his life. He was an avid reader, he was a very talented photographer, and he was the one that introduced me to the world of Middle-earth. It was in the summer of 1969. We were at the beach and he drew a map of Middle-earth in the sand. And he told us tales, all of us kids who were gathered around, he told us tales of hobbits and wizards and a dark land of shadow called Mordor. From that moment on, I was hooked on the world of Middle-earth. That fall, I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings for the first time. I was 9 years old. I remember once he came home really excited and told us that he had found a hobbit hole. We jumped in his red truck and he drove us out into the country where he had found a miniature house in a tree trunk. My brother CB always had a way of seeing the magic in the world. So I want to give him a final toast. Here's to you, CB. Anyway, if you're interested in hearing more of my experiences about the first time I read The Lord of the Rings, I have a review that I did on my Rivendoa site, and you can go here to check it out. If you want to see my experiences with reading The Lord of the Rings and my review of The Lord of the Rings and having read it for the first time. So if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and delve deep into my review of The Rings of Power. Let's begin this review by laying down some groundwork. I will be discussing Tolkien canon versus the Middle-earth legendarium. You might be asking, what is that exactly? A quick and easy definition is that canon includes only content based upon the published works of Professor Tolkien or his son Christopher Tolkien that pertains to the world of Arda, which includes Middle-earth. On the other hand, we have what I call Middle-earth legendarium, which includes all writing, films, TV shows, games, or websites that expand upon the world Tolkien created. There is a lot of gray area between canon and legendarium, but for the most part, Middle-earth legendarium is any scene, character, dialogue, or plot element that is not taken directly from Tolkien's writings. For instance, Lurtz the Uruk-hai who killed Boromir is not canon because he was an invented character for the films. I would have to say about 30 to 40% of the Lord of the Rings films are not canon, and at least 60% of the Hobbit films are not. Games like Shadow of Mordor, The War in the North, are filled with scenes and characters that are not pulled directly from canon. In the Rings of Power, there is quite a bit of non-canon content, but I'll get into more detail on that shortly. The other important item to note in the creation of this series is the fact that the story, plot, and characters in The Lord of the Rings of Power, can only legally be based upon content from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings books. Many are surprised by this because it has been incorrectly reported time and again in the media that the series is based upon content from The Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth. It is not. Amazon acquired the license for the TV rights from Middle-earth Enterprises and Warner Brothers, who only own the rights and the license for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but I think it is important to share the history of the property rights and license. So here we go. In 1969, J.R.R. Tolkien sold the film and television and gaming rights, along with the merchandising rights, to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings to United Artists for a lump sum of what would be worth in today's dollars about $2.5 million, and, importantly, 7.5% royalty interest in any future adaptation. United Artists decided at that particular time that a film could not be made of The Lord of the Rings, so they sold the rights to the Saul Zaentz Company in 1972, who soon created Middle-earth Enterprises to manage the license of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. In that deal, United Artists retained the worldwide film distribution rights. After the passing of Professor Tolkien in 1973, several legal entities were formed to manage his published works. These were eventually consolidated into what is now known as the Tolkien estate, which still retains that 7.5 royalty interest. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Middle-earth Enterprises leased the film rights to Rankin Bass and Bakshi Film Productions, who produced animated films and TV movies. In 1982, MGM acquired the worldwide distribution rights to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings when they bought out United Artists. Famously, in 1996, Wingnut Films, helmed by Peter Jackson, made a deal with Middle-earth Enterprises and New Line Cinema to produce a 3-film adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. Its critical and box office success led to a new deal to make a trilogy of Hobbit films with Warner Brothers, which had by that time acquired the license through its acquisition of New Line Cinema in 2008. So we now have New Line Cinema, Warner Brothers, MGM, Middle-earth Enterprises, and the Tolkien estate, all with financial interest in the property. After Peter Jackson's 6-film saga made upwards of $5.9 billion in revenue, it was only natural that another big player would want to delve into Middle-earth. Amazon won the bid for a new Lord of the Rings TV series, laying down an estimated $250 million to acquire the license. Amazon gathered all of the players together, and they hammered out a deal for a 5-season show based upon the stories of the Second Age found in the appendices of The Lord of the Rings. Which brings us to our review of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. There is one last development in the rights that came in 2022, when the Embracer Group, a Swedish company, purchased the film rights from Middle-earth Enterprises for a whopping $2 billion. Warner Brothers, Amazon, and MGM still hold parts of the license, but for how long is not clear. I think it's important to note that in the end it will be the Embracer Group and the Tolkien estate who will steer the future of Middle-earth. Okay, now that we have all that out of the way, let's take a bite out of some red meat and talk Middle-earth fandom. Another key ingredient in the success or failure of the Rings of Power. Middle-earth fans are really a patchwork of overlapping fandoms. We have Tolkien fans, we have Lord of the Rings fans, we have The Hobbit fans, we have the Silmarillion fans, we have book fans, and we have movie fans, gaming fans, and fans of Middle-earth collectibles. We have die-hard canon fans, and fans of all things created in the Middle-earth legendarium. We have elven fans, dwarven fans, hobbit fans, and fans of orcs, fans of kings, wizards, and dark lords. But what we all have in common is a love of the world Tolkien created. Middle-earth fandom has always been a place of respectful community based upon the ideas Tolkien cherished. Bonds of friendship, loyalty, and love. Or at least that's how it used to be. If you had asked me several years ago if the toxic fandom seen in other fantasy franchises would infect Middle-earth, I would have said no, and yet here we are. The level of vitriol and animosity spewed in the last few years toward the Amazon series, its creators, the actors, and other fans have brought shame on our community. Shame. I used to believe we were above all that. Apparently not. I suppose it's the era in which we live. Social media has been the death of tolerant and civilized community. In the online world of Twitter, TikTok, and Meta, if we disagree, that makes us enemies. That is an idea Tolkien would never have agreed to, because for the professor, the bonds of friendship outlasted all else, at least in his writings. Now, I'm not saying that having issues with the show is a problem. If the writing, acting, or production of the Rings of Power is not to your liking, or if you have legitimate concerns about how it might have strayed from Tolkien canon or lost the feeling of Middle-earth, then by all means voice your opinions, because I also share those concerns. However, what chaps my ass is the ugly vocal minority that is using the show to promote an agenda of hate and discrimination. You can spot them a mile away. They like to use the word woke as a derogatory term to shield themselves from being called racists and bigots. In their online content, they never say a single good thing about the series. Everything in the show is awful. Everything about it is a failure. That is not legitimate critique. That is cant. For those few, the Rings of Power controversy is just the latest in a series of culture war battles they want to wage, and when the heat shifts to another franchise or cultural topic, they will move on and leave Middle-earth in the dust. Because ultimately, it is not Tolkien's world that they care about. There has been a lot of talk about Tolkien's intent for Middle-earth, meaning that elves, dwarves, hobbits, and the men of the West should all be of Anglo-Saxon descent. However, Tolkien was never explicit about race in his writings, rather making vague mention of hair color as he did with Galadriel, though in all other cases his main characters are never described in such detail. I believe Tolkien did this deliberately in order to reach the widest audience. You may find it interesting to note that Tolkien never wrote anything in the text indicating that elves have pointy ears, or hobbits, or dwarves for that matter, or even orcs. We don't know what accents any of the characters might have had, or what kind of armor or clothing they may have worn. Tolkien hinted at the look of orcs and the men of Harad, but little else is known. My point being that when people say Tolkien had a particular cultural intent for Middle-earth, I think what they're really talking about is what they have seen in the movies, which, for the most part, was built upon the visual interpretations made by the artists Alan Lee, John Howe, and Ted Nasmith, which was the basis for the visual content and look of the films, not Professor Tolkien. The decisions made in the casting of the Rings of Power by the producers and showrunners brings a more modern take on that aspect of Middle-earth. But as I see, it does not contradict the published canon of Professor Tolkien. That's my opinion. You can take it or leave it. What we should look at is why the skin color of elves or hobbits makes some people so angry. The most troubling aspect of weaponizing Tolkien along political lines is the effect it has on our fandom. It has caused fan fatigue in the Middle-earth community. People have been turned off to the show simply because of all the negative controversy surrounding it. I have seen this happening in other fantasy franchises such as Star Wars and the MC universe, and it really saddens me to see it happening in Middle-earth. I have been a Tolkien fan since the early 1970s and will continue to be one long after Amazon's Rings of Power has ended. Nothing can change that. With all that said, I do have issues with the series, and I want to address them in the next part of my review of the Rings of Power. But I will save that for part 2. Today I want to end by offering a star rating based on the fan reaction to the series and also the larger cultural reaction. As always, I will make my star ratings based upon the good, the bad, and the decidedly ugly of our current fandom. So, to end part 1 of my review, here's my 5-star rating of fan reaction and the cultural reaction to The Lord of the Rings of Power, Season 1. Are you guys ready? Here it is. I'm giving the show a 2-star rating out of 5 based upon 2 important points. First, the over-the-top negative and toxic reaction to Amazon and the series has affected both the broader base of fans and in turn subdued the larger cultural reaction to the show, which has been sort of ho-hum. It is my opinion that the toxic fandom greatly affected people's interest in the show. However, Amazon must bear a good portion of blame based on how they initially promoted the series, which turned off a lot of real Middle-earth fans and fed the toxic trolls. So, for our first star rating in this review, I'm giving the show 2 stars for fan reaction. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve into other aspects of the show. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that first part of my review of The Rings of Power. Let me know in the comment section what you think of this review, and don't hold back. Really let me know what you think. In our next Shadowcast, I'll be bringing you guys part 2 of the review of the first season of The Rings of Power, and I'm going to be focusing on the adherence to Tolkien canon with a comparison to the animated feature, the live-action films, and the games in the Tolkien Legendarium. So, until next time, I hope to see you traveling across the Morgai, the inner fence of Mordor, under the looming darkness of the Mountains of Shadow.